So what I'm really going to cover today is to understand the smartphone user in Asia and to really take you on the journey and to showcase our region, how the users, the smartphone users in our region here is really a bit different from what it is in the rest of the world, and how they are actually the next big thing and driving the users of games and casual games in general. So maybe just a quick introduction to myself. I'm actually the Associate Director and Telecom Industry Group Leader for Nielsen. And basically in my job, what I do is a lot of fun stuff. Basically, I work with the handset manufacturers and telecom operators to uncover insights in the area of telecoms. And one of the areas that I'm really, really very interested in is also in expanding the viewpoint of telecoms into games, into mobile finance, into the new spaces that people are using the mobile phones for. For Nielsen, I promise not to talk too much, about the company, but really, what I really want to focus on is that the last point, which is innovation. There's really a lot of innovation coming out from Nielsen, and it really is very exciting because it allows us to actually do a lot of interesting research. And I want to showcase some of that to you because it allows us to go deep into the insights and to see how people are actually using their mobile phones today. Particularly, what I'll be covering are two things. One is called Smartphone Insights, which is a syndicated study that is a large-scale study that goes out and speaks to people to understand how they actually use their mobile phone, what drives their interest. And the other one is also very interesting. It's called the Ondevice meter, which is a software that we install into the phones to really understand how people are actually using, how much time they're using, what apps they're downloading, whether they're using apps, and what's the half-life or the shelf-life of the apps. Okay, so without further ado, let me first start about the Nielsen Global Smartphone Insights. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, this is a large-scale survey. We are running it in over 25 countries now, and we continue to expand it. And really the focus is on smartphone users, covering the following areas. For today, I'll be sharing with you insights from the mobile data and applications usage, as well as a bit of mobile media and advertising. Okay, so what do we already know today? We know that as of 2010, smartphones have officially arrived, and that was the quarter where smartphone shipments actually outgrew, or they actually outshipped the PC shipments, and I think there's been no turning back since. What does the data tell us? Okay, so what we see today is that there is actually very high penetration of smartphones in many of the APAC markets, but again, there's a variation. So if there's one takeaway, it's really understanding that our region is really very diverse and at different stages of maturity in terms of smartphone adoptions. So the percentages that you see on the slides today is really about, of all the mobile users, how many percent are actually smartphone users. And we can see that Singapore and Malaysia are relatively quite high. I've also put in the UK and Egypt for comparison, but we see that India, Thailand, and Indonesia are also catching up, but they are really catching up very quickly. And these represent a very huge potential base for game developers out there. Okay, and the smartphone growth revolution continues. So when we ask non-smartphone users whether they were keen to actually purchase a smartphone in the next 6 months or in the next 12 months, actually more than half of them actually told us that they will be keen to do so. So we can see that this revolution continues to grow, and there is a lot of legs in this growth yet. Now, what about games within the space of how people are using the mobile phones? We can see that games, over between 50 to 70% of users of smartphones actually use games that are either connected online or they're actually preloaded into the phones. And this compares very favorably with the big two, right, which is web surfing and social networking. So, like, who uses phones for calls or text anymore? People are going in it and using it as a portal and a window to the world. So you can see that the way games actually stack up is really catching up, and may even one day match the usage of web surfing as well as social networking. Okay, I'm going to pull out 3 countries now: Singapore, Thailand, and Indonesia, and just to showcase the gaming reach within these 3 countries. So we can see here that Singapore has a very high gaming reach of 72%, and in Thailand it's 47%, and Indonesia 43%. But what's really interesting is also how much people actually game in these countries. And we see that our Indonesian friends are really spending a lot of time on the games. And again, this represents a very interesting opportunity. In terms of the sessions per week, it is actually our Thai friends who actually go in, even though they only spend 8 hours per week on average, but they actually go in for many sessions. So what implication does this have? I believe that it also tells us about the types of games that would be hot in these countries that will generally sell better. Okay, and carrying on, we see that each country actually displays different preferences. So this is actually, I would say, survey data, which is actually stated by the respondents. And what they're telling us is that puzzle strategy games is really big in Singapore and Malaysia and in China. But in Thailand, it's all about memory boosters. In Indonesia, it's sports and racing. India, sports and racing, and so on. So there's a lot of data that I'll be flashing today. Do not worry if you can't catch everything because they'll be available for download. But I just really wanted to put it out here for all of us to see that really this region is very diverse even in our usage of games. Okay, and where do people game? So even though people are gaming on their smartphones, it's not necessarily that they are doing it out of the home. In fact, the majority of the users state that they are actually doing mobile gaming in the home itself. And this is interesting because it is in the home where you compete with the rest of the screens. You have the television, you have the game consoles, you have the internet, but yet a lot of people still continue to game at home. And the psychology, the way that they actually game, the situation where they are gaming in is actually very different at home for when they are commuting, for example, for when there is actually a limited time available, and they probably just have half an hour to kill, but things are different at the home. So again, some food for thought in how we actually design games around these usage situations. Okay, so the next one is the percentage who actually download apps in the past 30 days. And we do see that generally, across the countries, the number of apps downloaded is fairly consistent. But one thing that is not consistent is actually the payment for games. So again, just a caveat that this is stated by the respondents. But we see that in Singapore and in the UK, on average, people are saying that, yes, I am paying for games, right? But it is also very different in Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, where people are not necessarily paying for games. So it's, of course, very interesting to see how the whole industry is moving, as Mike has previously mentioned about the freemium model, about value tokens within the games and so on. Okay, so next I want to share with you on-device metering, right, which specifically zooms into India, okay, as a country. And that is where on-device metering for Nielsen really started. Okay, so what is it? On-device meter is actually a software that we install into the smartphones. It is always on, so it tracks it 24 hours a day and it sends a signal every couple hours to a server that collects the data. It is highly accurate because we do not ask respondents to give us answers, but rather we actually track the actual usage. Okay, so the insights from there come right now in India from a panel that's over 5,000, and it covers the major OSs. We have iOS coming online in the next couple of months. Okay, so I believe that this gives us a very comprehensive feel and understanding of how people actually use the mobile phones. Let's take a look at some of the insights and let's see if we can learn something from there. Okay, so maybe I'll just start off with a quiz first. Any of our friends here from India today? All right, so maybe you can take a guess at this answer, okay? So when it comes to the total on time on the phone, where somebody's actually doing something on the phone, playing a game, listening to some music, or switching applications, downloading something, how on average the smartphone user in India, how many minutes or how many hours are they spending on their phones? Anybody want to give a guess? Just shout the answer. 8 hours. Okay. It's a bit lower than that. Okay. Sorry? 5 hours. Okay. Let's have a third guess. That's a good guess. 4.5 hours. Okay. So when we actually look at the data, it's actually not that high. Okay. And this, remember, is actual data. So it's just over 2.5 hours. But sometimes we get so engrossed that we tend to think that we are actually using the phone. But of course, we could be texting and then we get distracted and we do something else and then we come back to complete the text, for example. So that particular time may not exactly be captured. Okay? So of the 2.5 hours, we break down further into the different categories of what people are doing on the phones. So it could be communication, which is your phone and your text. Okay? Entertainment, browsing, phone management, changing your settings and so on, and using applications. So games would fall under the category called entertainment, right? So again, I'm going to have you guys guess on the number of minutes out of the 157 minutes that is spent on entertainment. Anyone? Sorry? 30 minutes. Good guess. Okay, let's have a second one. 20 minutes. Okay. Sorry? 60. So if I aggregate your answers together, I think I would get the answer, which is 40 minutes. Okay? So in other words, about a quarter of the time that our Indian consumers are spending on the phone is actually in the entertainment space. And games actually makes up, it makes up about 7, okay, I can't see from where, but yeah, about 7 minutes or about 5% of the total time, okay? Now, we see that applications usage is on the rise, and of course, a lot of games today are moving into the application space, right? They are not played necessarily through mobile websites. And just in the last couple of months, so maybe about 7 months alone in India, we do see a steady uptrend in the percentage of time, number of minutes that's being used in games, which is denoted by the green line over there. Okay? And what if we took apart the OSs and we broke it down into the number of minutes? Well, the first thing we see is that Android users tend to spend about more than 3 hours on the phone. So maybe some of you who gave very big answers earlier, you might be Android users. Okay? We also have Symbian users that are quite heavy users of the phone. Okay? And interestingly, in terms of the online apps, it is actually the Android and the Symbian users that tend to use a greater proportion of the usage time on the app space. Okay? Next, we take a look at demographics, and we see something very interesting, which many of us would have already sort of felt, that the females are actually the ones who are spending more time on online applications. Okay? And the males actually today are still spending more time on internet online browsing. And if you look across the age groups, then you would see that what I like to call the social or the digital natives, people who are born into an online era, okay? Maybe not you and I, okay, we're a bit older than that. The under 24s, right? They are so used to being so digital that the phone becomes a really big part of their life. And you can see that the below 24s have a much larger usage of the phone, and that percentage actually goes down. But as Mike has mentioned just now, that's not necessarily mean that we ignore the older market, because that's where a lot of whales came from. I think he just called my mother a whale just now. But really, she's the one that I introduced the games to, and then within 2 days she beats my high score because she spends all her time training on it, right? So that puts me to shame, yeah. Okay, so we see that, as I mentioned just now, the females as well as the younger age group, yeah. Okay, what about the time spent on gaming? And we do a deep dive, and we see that generally the Android users today are the ones who are spending more time on the gaming, 8% of their total time, or about 14 minutes per day, out of the 193 minutes of total time spent, okay? And what about game usage by day part? And this is really interesting, and I'm sure that many of the companies here also do your own tracking, right? We do see that as the day progresses, day turns to night, you will see that the amount of time that people actually spend on games actually increases. And we do see in particular that there is 1 hour, okay, that really stands out, and that is the 7 to 8 o'clock, or the after dinner hour, right, where people are a bit more relaxed, they're done with work, and then they start to game. Okay, so 21% of the gaming time in India is actually spent just in that hour. Implications for how we develop our games, or when we choose to advertise to people, I think certainly we can learn from this. Okay. What about the top mobile games? Okay, so there are many, many different sets of data out there, and this really just comes from that set of the 5,000 panelists that we speak to. Across Android, we do see that, of course, Angry Birds is still the king, right, as of February 2012. But what's interesting here is also the number of games that make up, maybe the top 5. So you can see that for BlackBerry, it is very much a smaller ecosystem, and hence you will see that the top few games actually have a wider reach, whereas in Android, it is a lot more diverse, and hence the top games actually have a lower reach. Okay? The other one that's interesting to look at is when we plot the time span and the reach of the mobile gaming, and we see that arcade games, for example, have the widest reach, but also do not have the highest time span. But what's really sticky, and this again concurs with what Mike had shared earlier, that it is a card games that are very sticky. People are spending a lot more time on it, even though it reaches out to a smaller set of the audience. Okay, and what about mobile advertising? So a lot of focus today is really spent on, in-app purchases and so on. But I think there's still a space for mobile advertising. Okay, is it still relevant to us today? And we can see across the countries that mobile ads are actually becoming very prevalent, especially in countries like China, Hong Kong, the North Asian countries, and a bit less so in Indonesia, Thailand, and Australia. Okay. But in more developed markets, the highest mobile ads exposure is through apps and the mobile internet. So when the game companies want to work with bigger brands to monetize their products, right, there are different ways that they can do it. And we can see here that apps itself is actually becoming the go-to place to get your consumers' eyeballs. Okay. Sorry, this goes back to the Smartphone Insights report that I shared about earlier, the syndicated report. Yeah. However, we know that resistance to mobile ads is high. People still see the ads; they do not necessarily click through, and it continues to be true for many of the countries here, where the instance of mobile ads rejection, people who do not want to click on the ads, continue to remain high. So that's challenging. So how can we get through the clutter? Right? There's so much clutter. People are bombarded with media messages everywhere they go today. Okay, I'd like to suggest that we can continue to work via the route of free content and location-based integration to help improve acceptance to mobile ads. Okay, so our consumers are telling us that if you are a bit more creative in the ads that you use, okay, and you actually make it relevant to me, you put it in the right context, then there's a higher likelihood that I would actually click on the ad. And we are actually in a perfect storm of different technologies today. Right? We have location-based, we have near-field communications and wireless contact payments, we have augmented reality. I believe that there is actually a very interesting space when you combine this together with games and together with the social revolution that's really happening. I think we are going to see a lot of creative juices flowing and a lot of interesting games that will really tap into this and to maximize monetization, because this is also the space where as people play, we will get them to pay, right? So some thoughts and implications for casual game strategy. Just to summarize, okay? So one of the things we learned today is that smartphones are still showing healthy growth, and I think this is the momentum keeps going. Gaming behavior varies across countries, demographics, OS. So even as we plan for games, we need to keep all this in mind, okay? Consumers gaming, but not all are paying today, and we need to find new ways to actually monetize through advertising or through in-app games. Okay, and finally, the convergence of tech and social games presents a really, really wonderful opportunity, and I'm so excited to really move forward to see what's coming in the next year and ahead. Thank you very much.